They said the colonies were ours, that the red of our coats would forever dye the soil, from Boston to the Carolinas, with the blood of rebels and wild beasts alike. I believed it once like a fool. My name best not spoken aloud. In the Empire's records, I was a sergeant of His Majesty's 22nd Regiment of Foot. But in truth, I was a witness to the unraveling of an empire, all bound to the name of one man, Washington. The first time I laid eyes on the colonies, I was a boy of 17, barely out of Portsmouth. The docks of Boston greeted us with clamor and stink, smoke from pipes, cattle being herded, children barefoot in the streets chasing hoops, and whispers of unrest that clung to the air like humidity. The Americans, these so-called subjects, lived like no Englishmen I'd known. They spoke our tongue but spat it with suspicion. They tilled their lands with pride, not servitude, and had in their eyes the dangerous glint of men who had forgotten they were ruled. Their houses were wood, their roads mud, and their tempers fire. Yet they were not savages. No, they were clever, too clever. They read books, printed pamphlets by the thousands, and debated as furiously as they drank. They looked at Parliament as a distant tyrant, and the king as a noble too far removed to understand their grievances. But what grievances? We protected their borders in the French wars. We built their ports, gave them language, trade, religion. Still, they murmured, over taxes, over stamps, over tea. And in those early days, there was a name they would mutter around the hearths of taverns and in the sermons of country pastors: Washington. He was not born of nobility, nor graced with the wit of Voltaire or the charm of Burke. Yet he held something more valuable than gold: respect. A Virginian, tall, solemn, eyes like thunderclouds, he had served alongside us in the war against the French and the savage tribes, and some among us had even called him comrade. But that was a younger man, one still tied to empire. Time had worn that tie to thread. I remember the day the first shots were fired, Lexington. We marched with polished boots and loaded muskets, expecting cowards. What we found were men, farmers, blacksmiths, school teachers, standing with muskets as old as their fathers. We laughed at them until they fired, until blood spattered across the green and one of our own fell beside me, a bullet through the eye. They did not fight like gentlemen. They ducked behind trees, they ran, they reloaded on the move. We called them rabble, but they called themselves free. The war began not with thunder, but with a long, slow boil. Cities turned to fortresses. Ordinary men wore uniforms sewn by wives. We controlled Boston, but only just. Every night lanterns flickered across the river. We knew they were watching, and among them he rose. Washington did not wear a crown, nor did he raise his voice. But when he spoke, even our spies leaned in. He wore the uniform of a general, tailored yet simple, and he rode a white horse through the lines. He built an army from dust and anger. Men starved in his camp. They had no shoes, little powder, and less training. But they stood with him. We had more men, more guns, ships that blackened the horizon. Still, we could not break them. Bunker Hill cost us dearly. The hill itself was meaningless, but the slaughter was not. We charged 3 times. They fired from behind fences, stone walls, from heaven itself, it seemed. It was not until the 3rd wave that we drove them back, and by then, the blood in the earth was more ours than theirs. The Americans did not break. If anything, they grew bolder. Washington knew we could win battles, but not the war. So he waged a different war, a war of patience. He struck at night, crossed icy rivers with ragged men, and ambushed Hessians while they still held their Christmas drink. That winter in Trenton broke our rhythm. That was the first time I heard officers speak his name with a kind of troubled reverence. He was no great tactician. He lost more than he won, but he endured, and he inspired. His men would rather die in frostbite at Valley Forge than kneel. Valley Forge, how do I describe such a place? We thought it would be the death of the rebellion. They starved, they froze, they wept. Yet when spring broke, they emerged, disciplined, trained. A Prussian, Baron von Steuben, had forged them into soldiers. Washington had held them together with sheer will. Meanwhile, we were splitting at the seams. Loyalists betrayed their neighbors. Generals quarreled. Supplies dwindled. The crown expected a quick end. It would not come. One night in Philadelphia, I found myself drinking with a colonial girl who claimed to have once served Washington food at Mount Vernon. She described him as quiet, always lost in thought, staring out over the Potomac like it whispered secrets. I asked if he had a temper. She said no, only a fire inside, the kind that burns. By 1778, France had joined their cause. That changed everything. Now it was not a rebellion, it was a war. We fought in New York, the Carolinas, the swamps and forests. We burned homes, hung rebels, and yet they kept coming. In the South, Cornwallis sought to crush them. He had victories, but the land itself turned against us. Washington, ever the ghost, maneuvered northward while Lafayette harried us like a fox. The Americans and French closed in on Yorktown like a trap. I was there, I dug trenches. I watched cannonballs scream through the night, shattering trees and men. Washington stood upon the ridge watching us with that same stillness. He had waited years for this moment. Cornwallis surrendered. Some say he was ill. Others say he could not bear to face Washington. The war did not end that night, but the soul of the empire cracked. We returned to England not as conquerors, but as men who had seen a new kind of warfare. Not of steel, but of spirit. And Washington, he could have crowned himself king. No one would have stopped him. But he did not. He stepped down, returned to his farm, as if the war had not changed him, as if he had simply borrowed power and returned it untouched. But I saw it, I saw what he became. There are whispers still among veterans and ghosts that Washington knew things he should not have, that he had seen dreams of fire and eagle-winged empires, that he walked in his garden speaking to no one. Some say he made a pact, not with devil nor God, but with destiny. I do not know, I only know that we lost. Not to muskets or French ships, but to an idea, to a man who became more than a general, who spoke not in decrees but in silence, whose presence held men together more than gold or glory. I was there, I saw it happen. And now, as an old man, when I hear Americans speak of freedom, of founding fathers, of Washington, I say nothing, because I saw it with my own eyes, and I still do not understand how we lost. But we did, and perhaps we were meant to.